Oh, hello, Sangha. Mountain Cloud members, newcomers. Hope the incense didn't just run someone off, but yeah, welcome to this evening, this wide embrace of community, this community of practice. Welcome in the Zendo, welcome in the cloud, wherever you are here. Every time I say that, it's just the very first time here. So tonight, as most of us know, is Halloween. Really great to see so many folks come out. It's a time of joy and delight for children, dressing up in costumes, going trick-or-treating. I did a little Googling about this, and Halloween, it turns out, is wildly popular in the United States, in Canada, and in the UK. And it's now celebrated in countries all around the world. I didn't really know that. Last night, our Mountain Cloud member, longtime practitioner, Colleen offered a short talk and a shared conversation for Wisdom Wednesday for that gathering. Colleen's talk, springing from her reading of a book called Joyfully Just by Kamilah Majied. It was especially heartening in this week before the election. Colleen led with joy, the joy and wonder of children. Colleen is the director of a nonprofit agency that works on behalf of abused and neglected children. And she described one of those children, a young boy, who exudes this wonder. She told this story that every time this child comes into the office, he picks up an object and holds it up and looks at it and goes, wow. Or she said, whoa. And then she invited us into this exercise to just pick something up. And she had passed out little, I don't know what they were in the Zendo, we were online. So sitting at our table in our home dining room, Scott, there happened to be a knife. He picked it up. There was a pen. Look at that. Can you really see that? She invited us to pick it up and say, either silently or out loud, wow. Her talk went on to weave this wonder into our practice. Whatever comes up in sitting, in our bodies, our hearts, no matter the content. Wonder. She spoke of resilient compassion, resilient creativity, and resilient joy. She spoke to us exactly where we are. One quote from the book Colleen shared just struck home. It's by a Buddhist philosopher, writer, Daisaku Ikeda. Here's the quote. The joy of life is to be found not by evading life's sufferings, but by grappling with them to the finish. I recall one Zen master who said, awakening is to follow any one thing through all the way to the end. Any one thing. What is the end of this? Or this? What happens when you really see it? Well, I want to say, wow. It's going to be my mantra for the next few days. Maybe longer. Even the dedication page to Majied's Joyfully Just, this book, which I started reading last night, the dedication resounds with this wonder, resilience, and joy. So here's how it begins. She writes, this book is both transmitted from and dedicated to my ancestors, teachers, and leaders, particularly the Black people who have inspired me through their ways of being, their creative works, their love for me, and their joyful resistance. So here we are on All Hallows Eve, this holy night, as the Old English name suggests, taking up a practice that invites the joy and wonder of really don't know. Practicing together in a tradition that's steeped in ancestry, ancestors named and unnamed. Soaking in transmission, even if we don't realize it. All Hallows Eve, the beginning of what's called All Hallow Tide, if you follow that tradition. Halloween, well, it used to be Halloween, All Saints, All Souls, but for us, it's more like Halloween and then these 2 days of Dia de los Muertos. So kind of searched around that too. Spanish invaders brought All Souls Day to Mexico in the early 1500s. And then the indigenous people combined it with an ancient Aztec tradition of celebrating ancestors. I ran across this piece by National Geographic Kids that describes Day of the Dead like a family reunion, except dead ancestors are the guests of honor. Wow, just offering this very pungent incense at the altar. There are a few pictures of David Holt, who just made a bequest to Mountain Cloudy. Passed away recently, and so we're honoring him in great gratitude for his bequest and also just his long participation in the life of this community. Dead ancestors are the guests of honor. So there's skeletons and masks feasting in the graveyard, talking to the ancestors. This article talked about families who will take, a newborn baby or a young child to introduce it to the grandparent in the grave. It's a celebration. Honoring the dead, National Geographic says, and reminding themselves that death is just a part of life. When Scott and I were in Telluride a few weeks ago, some time ago, we were riding on that free gondola system one day, and in the car that we were in, hanging car, the gondola, there was a father with his young son. And at some point, the father just turned to this little boy and said, "What are you afraid of?" And he said, "Skeletons and rattlesnakes." Wonder if these celebrations in the cemetery also help children turn fear to wonder. This joy, wonder, resilience, somehow an overturning of the boundary between life and death. And all of this, the famous death poem of Ryokan comes up. We've heard before, but it's timely. 3 lines, showing its front and showing its back, a falling maple leaf. Showing its front and showing its back, a falling maple leaf. Life, death, form, emptiness, front, back. Some see this as good, bad, or light, dark. One leaf just falling, and in Ryokan's way, overturning everything. He was known as Great Fool, a name he loved. So let us turn now to a koan that carries a spark of overturning. This is from the Blue Cliff Record, case 15, called Yunmen's A Preaching Overturning Oneness. Or sometimes it's translated a preaching in reverse, or no preaching on oneness. Anyway, we'll look at it. Here's the case. A monk asked Yunmen, what is it when this is not an activity of the mind at this moment? Nor is it a thing at this moment. Yunmen said, a preaching overturning oneness. So dense, so direct. This monk comes asking, what is it when there's no thought? So, no subject. And nothing exists, no object. The question might spring from this monk's experience of deep samadhi, that state when there is not the slightest subject-object separation. No hindrance, nothing to impinge on anything. Samadhi. And Yunmen meets the question, actually, with one word. Toisetsu. Toisetsu. A preaching overturning oneness, or a preaching in reverse, or no preaching on oneness, or preaching subverting the one, or more literal still, maybe less experiential, an upside down statement. Not sure that's so helpful. Oh, except there's a lovely talk on this case by Stefano Muy Barato, a sensei who founded Treetop Zen Center in Maine. He did a lot of things. He's died. But he just says this toisetsu of Yunmen, he translates as ass backward. Overturning. The case, this case 15, is a pair with the one just before it, Hekigan Roku 40. A lot of water under the bridge, but this was the last talk I gave here 2 weeks ago, was on case 14. In that case, a monk comes asking, curious if it's the same monk. There he asks, what is the whole lifetime teaching of Shakyamuni Buddha? And Yunmen says, Aisetsu, the sum of it all. Yeah, one word, a preaching in accordance, or the way that we looked at it, the sense we took up, just accordingly. Throughout his lifetime of teaching, it is said, the Buddha taught each one accordingly, perfectly fitting what that person could receive. It's a beautiful comment. But what about this accordingly? What about the oneness Yunmen conveys? It's getting cold now. Getting out the winter coat. Accordingly. But that could also be understood as kind of an explanation. You know, when you're thirsty, you have a drink. When you're cold, you put on a coat. If you have one. The whole lifetime teaching of Shakyamuni Buddha. What is this accordingly? All of it. This desk, this computer, candle, the flowers, the night sky. Each one sitting here. One student who was sitting with this koan, this case, came in and said, everything is already there. Each thing. Everything. Such a tight fit. Actually, the image of Indra's net comes to mind. Just this week, Ruben sent us, I think it might be hot off the press, beautiful introduction that he's written for Ben Connolly's book that's going to come out. I think it's due in July. It's on the Flower Garland Sutra. And Reuben wrote the introduction. And in it is so wonderful to read. Reuben highlights the image in the sutra, which is, conveying what Shakyamuni Buddha realized. This net of Indra is, from that sutra. Reuben writes, a vast and infinite web of jewels, wherein each jewel contains and reflects in itself the entirety of all jewels, and vice versa, wherein all jewels contain and reflect every single jewel in the entire net. The message Reuben reads is that, goes on, each one thing that exists in this universe, likened to a jewel, you, me, dogs, cats, trees, clouds, mountains, rivers, the sun, the moon, every star, every blade of grass, every speck of dust, contains and reflects each and everything else within itself. Everything is complete in itself as it contains the whole. And there is nothing in this universe that is not contained and held in all the other things in the universe. Thoroughgoing oneness. Setsu. Accordingly. And then comes case 15. Turn the page. We do that in koans. Sort of odd. You work with one and you turn the page. But they're all really there, like those jewels in each one. So 15. The question's no longer about the all that is one or the one that is all. The whole lifetime that is completely embodied and conveyed in each thing, each person, each thought. And then what about when all of that is gone? No subject, no person, no object, no thing. What is it when there is no subject and no object? The monk asks. What is it? And here's just a bit from that talk of Stefano Baragato. He writes, this is his way of putting it, it is a metaphor for the present intellect, mind, dharma, form, emptiness, relative, absolute, no thought stirring and nothing presenting itself. And the monk is claiming that it is none of these things. So what's left? What is left when all else is stripped away? Everything, including the dualism of form and emptiness, relative and absolute, mind and dharma, Baragato says, everything needs to go. Everything needs to be stripped away in order to find it. When everything is gone, what remains? Uman says, Toi Setsu. overturning, knocking down the one, preaching, overturning oneness. In other words, preaching godness. God. How will you show that? God. This nothing at allness that functions freely without beginning or end, constantly changing, dwelling nowhere, and yet coming forth. What is this when no subject or object remains? Yunmen could have said to the monk, right back at you, or your question, that's it. You are that. Teisho's verse to this case begins with the line, a preaching overturning oneness, dividing a tally. A tally is something you divide in half and then put together again to restore its original unity. So early tallies, way back, were made of wood with notches or characters carved into them. And then they were broken in half. And years later, they could be put together again as proof, of a contract, or sometimes proof of identity. This line in the verse is typically taken as pointing to the monk's question and to Yunmen's response, fitting like a tally. What if the tally also points to the unity of case 14 and 15, of Yunmen's taisetsu and toisetsu? What if that's it? Oneness, godness, this godness that pervades everything. There's no edge, there's nothing at all. No substance. This radiance, this dynamism of God. And then oneness, compassion, its vehicle, its function. God, here. Everything is complete in itself as it contains the whole. And there is nothing in this universe that is not contained and held in all the other things in the universe. Godness makes that so. We started out tonight looking at the joy and wonder of children and of the Dharma, as well as resilience. Last week, I was at Bodhimanda Zen Center for a 5-day conference on the evolution of women in Buddhism. So recalling women ancestors in the Dharma, sharing their stories, amplifying their voices, an expression of resilience, to be sure. And alongside it, the irrepressible joy and wonder. Not because our eyes were closed to the patriarchy of Zen, or Chan, or Son, or Tibetan Buddhism, but with eyes, hearts, minds open to the silencing of women, the exclusion, and to women's overturning, subverting courage, a preaching in the reverse, a preaching overturning the one that is and can only be half the tally. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes to share a few impressions in this season of honoring the ancestors, all saints, all souls, los muertos. Day one of this conference, Zhangji, a native Fang, who is the new guiding teacher at the Albuquerque Zen Center, gave a talk that she called, "Who were the women in Buddhism? And can we, as modern women, respond to the question as a koan?" So Zhangji in her talk raised the question of evolution, the title of this conference, Evolution of Women in Buddhism. Is there such a thing fundamentally? From the beginning, we have, well, you don't really have it, you are it. Buddha nature, awakened nature. Each of us, all of us. So it's clear women haven't had the voice to express this, but for around the margins. And then Zhangji talked about history, how the term history was synonymous with story until the 14th century, when it morphed into meaning a story that's true. Wow, it is so valuable and mutable, And she wasn't even really inviting us into this timeless reality, this history that doesn't exclude anything, all the ancestors, all of it. Zhangji also noted instances of when a constraint also functioned as a liberating factor. How she held this up, her tally. True liberation, liberation of this no self. Just to say, this is not in the least about erasure. It's about love, courage, the great determination that's one of those three essential attitudes of Zen. Zhangji invited us to live on the edge of the question. What is this? Question that doesn't expect an answer, only the question mark. She went on to tell the story of the Buddha's birth, a story she has retold in her book, Sid. Check it out. The next day at the conference, I spoke, and the next day after that, Maria Habito spoke, and then Sarah Shaw, a Buddhist scholar from the UK who teaches at Oxford. There may be more to come. I'll stop. But just to say that finding ourselves here, where we are, in this week of the election, so grateful for Sangha. At any rate, a line from Sarah's talk just continues to echo. It's from a Jewish 19th century rabbi who wrote, "Before the plague, the flower of healing has already bloomed." How might that be? One, God. God. One. There's no telling what will happen. Not next week, not in our lifetime, not for kalpas to come. We see the joy of children, even tragically, resiliently, the wonder that we have the chance to live with genuine openness, the impulse that brings many of us to this practice. We have the Sangha, this sitting for the whole world as the whole world. We have the invitation always there, this turning toward wisdom and compassion. And we have the longing for awakening that is already intimately right here, right now. So I'm going to end by calling up again this quote from Daisaku Ikeda. The joy of life is to be found not by evading life's sufferings, but by grappling with them to the finish. The joy. That resolution is always already complete. And it spurs us on to find what's ours to do. Hallowed. All hallowed. Thank you for this shared practice.